So I will speak about myself, and I hope that my English will be fine and understandable to you. And thank you for this opportunity. I'll speak about myself a little bit so you understand my background, who I am, where I come from. And then I'll move to talk more about the topic, which is the Palestinian perspective on the Holocaust. I'm not an expert on the topic. I will just share with you as my personal thoughts, my observations, my ideas about how this issue of the Holocaust is affecting my society and how it's perceived my society. So my name is Noor Awwad. I live in Bethlehem here in Palestine, and I'm 31 years old today, but I was born in 1991 in Amman, Jordan. I was born there because my family had to move there. My family are originally from Jerusalem. They used to live in what's today called west of Jerusalem, in southwest of Jerusalem, in a small village called Malha. Now, after the partition plan in 1947, Malha was attacked by Jewish paramilitary groups like the Haganah, and it was attacked on March 1948. It was again attacked in June and July 1948. After the massacre of Deir Yassin, which is another village not far away from Malha in west of Jerusalem, where many Palestinians were killed in that massacre, the people of my village started to flee and run away from their village to a safe refugee camp in the area of Bethlehem, including my grandparents. So in July 1948, Malha was captured by the Haganah, by the Jewish military groups. And after that, my grandparents who stayed in the refugee camp in Bethlehem, they were hoping that one day soon they will go back, they will move back to their village. But in 1949, in the end of the war, when the last ceasefire agreement was made, the ceasefire line was established between my family village, Malha, and the refugee camp where my grandparents lived. So they have to live in the West Bank now, after 1949, in a refugee camp. But my grandfather didn't want to stay there, so he moved to the town of Bethlehem, to the small town of Bethlehem. And both of my parents were born here in Bethlehem. My father and my mother both grew up, and after 1967, especially, they grew up under the Israeli occupation. After Israel occupied the West Bank in 1967. So by 1980s, both of my parents were fed up with the situation. They saw that there is no future for them here. There is no hope. And both of them were looking to move abroad and find a future somewhere else, to build their life somewhere else. That's why my parents moved to Jordan, and that's why I was born there. But in the year 1995, something different was happening. In 1995, we were in the middle of the Oslo peace process. And for the first time in the history of this conflict, now they are talking about making peace. Now they are talking about ending the occupation. Now they are talking about the Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. And that hope drove my parents back to Bethlehem. They said, let's go back, let's move back to Bethlehem and rebuild our life there. Hopefully, we're going to have a better future. So that's why my parents moved back to Bethlehem. I came to live here when I was 4 years old, almost. And if you ask me what do I remember from living here, my first or earliest memories here, it wasn't actually about the conflict. It wasn't about the occupation. Most of my childhood memories were about the times when my father used to work in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is 20 minutes driving away from where I live in Bethlehem. In 20 minutes driving toward Jerusalem, you can be in the center of Jerusalem from here, from my house. My father took me with him. As a family, we went to the beach at the weekends. It was fine. Now, I'm not saying that in those years, in 1995 until 2000, there was no conflict at all, or the occupation disappeared. But I was very young to understand the complexity of the situation around me. However, the year 2000 came, and the peace process that was supposed to lead to an end of this conflict and an end of the occupation, it did not. On the opposite, it left us with the second Intifada, the second Palestinian uprising against the occupation. More settlements being built, the occupation continued on the ground, and this is when I start to grow up and basically experience the conflict and the occupation. And I start to open my eyes more and what's happening around me. And you can say that my life experience felt like it changed completely. In the year 2002, Bethlehem was besieged. It was a war zone. I couldn't go to school. My father lost his job. He couldn't go to his work to Jerusalem. It was a very dangerous time. But during that time, I also grew up asking myself the question, do I see for myself life here? Do I see for myself a future? And obviously the answer was no, there is no future for me here. And I was very upset and angry on the situation, on the circumstances that I have to live under. And I start to think that once I grow up, I will just run away from here, go somewhere else, start a new life. And I want to be far away from all of the conflict here. That's on one hand. On the other hand, I couldn't really disconnect myself from what's happening around me. As a Palestinian, as someone living here, as Noor, I couldn't just not think about it and not ask myself the question, what is my responsibility about this situation, in this situation? And when I ask myself this question about my personal responsibility, I also ask it as a generational question at the same time. Like, what is my generation role to change the present and to make sure that there is a better future in our country here for the future generations? And I came up with the only answer. The only thing that we need to do, and we have to do, and we must do, is to end this occupation, to have a normal life here in our country. And therefore, I have to fight against this occupation. I don't have a second option to run away. This is not a solution. It might be a solution for me, but it's not a solution for everyone. It's not a solution for the future generations. So from this point of view, I start to say that my role and my generation role is to fight against and to resist against this occupation. And by 2000, so when I say resist, I just want to make sure that you understand that means both violent and with violence and without violence. Because to me, resistance is resistance against the occupation. And I saw resistance mostly as violence. But I also learned about nonviolent resistance. I learned about Palestinians who are resisting the occupation nonviolently. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter which approach you are using, violence or without violence. At the end of the day, I saw no legitimacy to the other side at all. Even if I'm fighting them without violence, even if I'm like resisting non-violently against the occupation, still there is no legitimacy to the other side. There is no legitimacy to who they are, their connection to the land, what they claim as their connection to this land, how they came here, they took our land, they took our homes. Who are they? Who are they claimed to be? So that's how I thought about the other side. And another thing I want to add. So because I live in the West Bank in Bethlehem, in order for me to travel to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or north or south of the country, I need to issue a permission, a permit, an allowance from Israeli army to be able to move from the West Bank and across the checkpoints to go to Israel proper. And I didn't, for 13 years, I didn't have the chance to get such a permission. So I grew up as a teenager until I became like 25 years old, 23 years old, was my first time actually to get a permission and to be able to cross the checkpoints and go inside Israel. And the important thing about that is my encounter with Israelis, my image of Israelis was only with soldiers. I only encountered Israeli soldiers at the checkpoints or when they invaded Bethlehem in 2002. or when they came to my house and they arrested my cousin. That's how I met them. They are all soldiers. It's like, I know that there are people living there on the other side of the wall, but in my experience, everyone I saw, every one of them I saw is an Israeli soldier. So in my imagination, all of them are soldiers. So in 2013, I got my first permission because part of my tour guiding course here in Bethlehem, the university managed to apply for us, for the students, a permission to go and continue our field trips inside Israel. Because when we learn about the history of the country, about Palestine, we learn about all of the country. Not only the West Bank and Gaza, we learn about everything about historical Palestine. So that's why we took those permissions, and that's what we did for 6 days. Now, I just want to add one more thing on this story before I move to talk about the Holocaust, is how I came to talk to Israelis. In 2016, I was guiding one of my groups to the city of Hebron, south of the West Bank. And it was a group of American students who are participating in a program that's called Middle East Studies. And on their part of their program was to visit Israel and Palestine, to spend equal amount of time on both sides, to meet people and meet activists and meet politicians and decision makers and tour guides and different people on both sides, and get to listen to the two perspectives, more than two perspectives. So I was just another tour guide on their trip, that I was supposed to show them the city of Hebron, the old city of Hebron that day. I took them from Bethlehem. We went to the old city of Hebron. I walked them around. I told the history. I took them to the Tomb of the Patriarchs, to the Ibrahim Mosque. We talked about the settlements. We talked about Oslo, before Oslo and after Oslo, what's happening now. And at the end of the day, before we finish our visit to Hebron and go back to Bethlehem, we still had one meeting to do in Hebron. And that meeting was with an Israeli settler. Now, I did few meetings like this before, but the way how it happened is that my group met with the settler inside the settlement, and I wasn't there because I'm not allowed as a Palestinian to enter the settlement. So I waited outside at one of the Palestinian stores, shops. And then after that, I took my group back to the hotel in Bethlehem. But this time, the Israeli settler, the speaker, he insisted that I should be part of the meeting. And we found a place to be together, which is not that easy. Actually, I had to hide among the group, to hide myself and go into an area as a Palestinian. I'm not supposed to be there, but we did it anyway. I sat and I listened to my group to what this speaker will talk about. He told us his story, his personal story as an American Jew, was born and raised in the US and had a good life there. But he gave up his life there to fulfill a much greater dream, according to him, which is to move here to the land of Israel and live in the land of Israel. And I was listening to him explaining about it. And he wanted to make sure that my group understand two things. One, the first thing he said, there is no occupation. And this was the first time ever in my life, at the age of 25, 26 years old, I hear a human being in my presence say there is no occupation. What do you mean there is no occupation? Now, I call myself a Palestinian. I live in the West Bank under Israeli sovereignty, under Israeli military control, and the Palestinian Authority. I'm a stateless person in a way because there is no state of Palestine. And I'm not a citizen of Israel, even though I live under Israel's sovereignty and I cannot become an Israeli citizen. Not only me, but even the Palestinian Authority itself, which is a self-autonomy, lives under the Israeli occupation. The Palestinian Authority does not control airspace or borders or natural resources or anything of that. And the head of the Palestinian Authority, the president of the Palestinian Authority, if he wants to move between one city and another, he has to get a permission, an allowance from the Israeli army to do so. And this man is telling me that what I'm living every day on the micro level. On the macro level doesn't exist. There's no occupation, he said. And the second idea he threw out was there is no Palestinian people. There are Arabs, Muslims and Christians, but there is no such thing as Palestinian nation. And this one I was more familiar with because as a Palestinian, I grew up always hearing that this is what the Zionist movement was founded upon. They were founded upon the idea that there is no one here, a land without people for a people without land, that we weren't here in the first place, that we don't exist. They deny us from the beginning of the conflict. So I wasn't shocked from the second denial, but I was frustrated after listening to him. And we argued about something, and then we left Hebron. On the way going back to Bethlehem, I had to stop for a last meeting with my group, and that was at Roots. Roots is the organization that I work with today, that I'm talking on its behalf and I'm representing. And Roots, Shorashim, is a group of Palestinians and Israelis who are meeting for dialogue, for transformation. It's a nonviolent initiative. And I heard about it for the first time, and I was angry, I was mad, I was upset, I was confused. What do you mean Palestinians and Israeli settlers, not any Israelis, but Israeli settlers in the West Bank, sitting with Palestinians talking about peace and transformation and what they are doing? I wanted to go there to this initiative with my group, to bring my group there because I had to, and to meet those Palestinians and tell them what an awful mistake they are doing. But my first visit to Roots, I met no Palestinian. There was no Palestinian there. There was only one person, Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, who was waiting us there to tell us about this initiative. Rabbi Hanan himself is a settler. He lives in Alon Shvut, in Gush Etzion, south of Bethlehem, southwest of Bethlehem. And that day he spoke about himself, about his story and who he is, and about what Roots does. And I'll just quote a little bit of what he said to us. So he said that he's a Jew, he's a Zionist, he's a settler, and then he explained what these words means. And I sat there and listened, and I said to myself, what do you think? He will not talk about the occupation, of course. He will continue to repeat these things that the other settler just said, and maybe I shouldn't even be sitting listening to him here. Maybe I should go sit with a bus driver outside. That's what I said to myself. But I sat until the end, and then Rabbi Hanan talked about the occupation, and he talked about settlements, and he talked about all of these issues, and he talked about my side and about the Nakba in 1948. And I was surprised and challenged by the things that he said. So that day, Rabbi Hanan opened my eyes because I left Roots with two feelings. I felt empathy and recognition, meaning that I felt that he was able to recognize me and my side, even though he's on the other side, even though he's the enemy. And more than that, he was able to empathize with me, with my story, with my people, with what we are going through, and what his side, what his people is causing us. So that's how I decided to come back to Roots and listen more and try to understand what's happening. So that's how I end up in Roots. Now, after that, I started a journey of meeting more Israelis, not soldiers, and even if settlers, but meeting the settlers, different settlers from different colors, kind of, and different ideas and thoughts and backgrounds, and getting to know more and more people on the Israeli side, especially and people on the Jewish side, as a tour guide as well. And during this journey of 6 years being in Roots, I definitely consider myself went in a transformation and an educational process where I managed to get out of my narrow perspective that's coming only from my experience as a Palestinian living here in the West Bank. I was able to listen to the other side narrative, think about it, reject it most of the time, or try to defend my narrative. And then I understand also what's happening on the other side. I start to also understand the other perspective. Sometimes I find myself, I am agreeing with the other side perspective, and sometimes not. And I also, during this journey, had to learn about the other side trauma and the other side experience that also affect this conflict a lot and affects the behavior, the collective behavior of our people. So I know I talked a lot about myself, but if I want to talk about the issue of the Holocaust, I will say that my first association with the Holocaust actually came from my story as a Palestinian refugee or a descendant of a refugee. Because what I heard from my parents, what I heard from people around me is that the Jews suffered in Europe from the Holocaust, from racism, from bad things, but then they came to us and they took our land in 48 and they kicked us out of our land, and they used what happened to them as a justification to take our land and to establish their country in our country, in our home. That was the first idea, the earliest thoughts or the earliest encounter with the Holocaust. In schools, I learned about the Holocaust as part of learning, I think in the 7th grade, when we were learning about the Second World War and about what happened in Europe. So we learn about it. But it's always very important to a Palestinian. It's a very crucial point to differentiate between like what happened to the Jewish people in Europe in the Holocaust and the creation of the Zionist movement and the creation of the State of Israel, meaning that Palestinians never accepted, or maybe the Palestinians, we have developed this behavior that we will never find any connection, or we will never accept any connection between the Holocaust and the establishment of the State of Israel, or the desire for some Jews to say that we will have a national movement, we want to establish a state, or that Zionism is justified because of the Holocaust and because of what Jews went through in the Holocaust and in Europe. I don't think that I think also that the media does that as well. Like the media on our side, whenever it mentions the Holocaust, it always makes sure to mention how Israel used it as a propaganda, as a way to basically justify its existence, or as a way to justify some of its actions, or to get some legitimacy for itself. And maybe you can actually feel that in the early decades of the conflict, in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. So that's very strong on the media. So whenever like the Holocaust is mentioned, Israel is always mentioned, but in a very negative way. And I believe that there is a lot of anti-Semitic thoughts in my community, in the Palestinian community, that the average Palestinian is not necessarily aware about these thoughts being anti-Semitic, or what's even like anti-Semitism mean, because what even anti-Semitism means actually to the Palestinian, because it's not really clear. Most of Palestinians, they feel that they are dominated by Israel, that they are humiliated by Israel in this conflict, and especially today in the experience of the occupation. And the hate, the anger that we have toward the other side is a result of our experience by the occupation, of our experience of this conflict. It takes you need to take a journey really to learn and to listen more, to start to differentiate between what could be an anti-Semitic thought, what could be like something that's not really what a Palestinian should think about the other side, or about the Jewish side. We always tend to say as Palestinians to separate between the Jews and between the Zionist movement. And why I'm saying that again, because this is a very important point, that we insist to see the Jews as people of religion. That's our understanding of what Judaism is and what the Jews are. Who are the Jewish people? It's people of religion, like Christians, like Muslims. That's how we understand them. And then we understand that Zionism is this evil ideology that came out in Europe during the era of colonization and used religion and history to justify colonizing our land and to take over our land. And again, the Holocaust is another tool for them to use and to justify what they did. So that's how I think mostly the issue of the Holocaust is mentioned, and that's how the Holocaust is talked about, and it's affecting my society. I think the other thing I want to add is that it's not easy for a Palestinian to come to learn about the Holocaust. It's not easy at all. It's not an easy decision. And if a Palestinian wants to learn about the Holocaust, he or she needs to let their walls a little bit down, shut down this kind of security, defense mechanism, and just hear what the other side went through without the fear that this will give legitimacy to the occupation or a legitimacy to the Zionist ideology and to what the state of Israel did to us. That's very important. I tell you that after I joined Roots, I got the invitation to visit Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the Holocaust Museum. And I wasn't sure about it. I wasn't sure if I can go, if I should go. All of the groups that I guide, for sure they went to the museum. And I am a tour guide in this country that I can't go. And if I want to go, it's such a big decision. Because I think of the museum itself and what it's trying to tell. Is it trying to tell the story of the Holocaust, or is it trying to justify the existence of Israel and what Israel did to us in 1948 and the occupation now? And I'll tell you, it wasn't an easy experience. I went at the end. I accepted one of these invitations and I went, and I can understand both. I can see this is the suffering of the Jewish people, and I can understand those who are saying that the Jewish people, they suffered a lot, and they stood up at some point, and they made for themselves a state. They made for themselves something. They made liberation, and now the Jews are not just weak people. They are strong. I can understand. I can see. I understand that. On the other hand, I was standing outside in the balcony of the Yad Vashem when you finish the tour, and overlooking West Jerusalem, the area of Givat Shaul specifically, which is where the village of Deir Yassin was located. And all I can think about as a Palestinian is what happened to us in 1948. So I'm holding these both things inside me, and thinking about it, and about the complexity of the situation. That's how I think. I hope I didn't miss anything. As I said in the beginning, I'm not the expert on the topic, but that's how Palestinians see the Holocaust and talk about it.
Thank you. I think Khaled has joined us as well. So Khaled, if you're there, it's a good time for you to join the conversation. While Khaled is getting in, let me just tell you who he is. Khaled Abu Awwad is among the foremost figures in the Palestinian community working towards peace and reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis. He's been a part of the founding of 3 groundbreaking organizations, has been awarded various international prizes for his projects, including the UNESCO Madanjeet Singh Prize for the promotion of nonviolence and tolerance in 2011, was named one of the 500 most influential Muslims in 2010 by the Royal Islamic Strategic Studies Center. So Khaled, thanks for joining us. Would you like to add to this discussion about evolution and your perspective on the Holocaust within Palestinian society and your own evolution on the subject?
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everybody. Thank you that you joined this meeting. Sorry that I have been late. We just finished half an hour joint iftar of Muslim and Jewish together in Roots Center. we have been around 120, 130 people eating together, ending the fasting day of Ramadan together, and we join together. And this has given me every time a lot of hope that that many people feel that there's no hope, this conflict cannot be solved. But for me, when I've seen these pictures, I'm sure that we can do it. And I hope that we will succeed as soon as possible. The time is not good. I know that every day of conflict, we have more and more victim and violence, and we lose days and weeks of instead of join the life and be happy, we suffer and we live in a fear, in unsecurity conditions everywhere here. So I hope that will end as fast as. My name is Khaled. I am the manager of Roots. Now I have been the manager of the bereaved family for 7 years. I am a Palestinian, I am a Muslim. I started dealing with the conflict since 2000 when I lost my first brother, Youssuf, in 2016 of November, who have been killed by the Israel army. My family story is represent the Palestinian story of with this conflict, because I'm a son of a refugee family. My family story with the conflict starts since 1948, when we have been pushed out of our village Kubebe, which is called Lachish now. So since there, my family moved to Gush Etzion. We used to live in Gush Etzion until 1967, the 6-day war. Again, we left Gush Etzion. We ran away from the war and to Jordan. We spent 1 week, and then my father decided the war come down, and he decided to bring us back to our homeland. So we returned after a week. And we rent a house in a village, a small village called Bet Umar. It's close to Gush Etzion. And there we grown. We grown with a lot of questions why we are refugee, who took our village, who took our land, who caused us to suffer. And all the time we've seen that the Israel people or the Jewish people is our enemy. They are our enemy, we should fight them, they have no right here, and all these kind of thinking. We grown with this until 1967. 1967, when the First Intifada started, we as a family have been part of the leadership of the Intifada. Our mother, her name is Fatima, her nickname is Youssuf. She's very known, she passed away, Allah yarhamha, but she is one of the Palestinian women leaders in the Intifada. And this has caused to us to be arrested, to spend part of our life in the Israel jail. Our mother, spent 6.5 years. I spent 1.5 years. My brother Ali spent 4 years. My sister Siham spent 1 year. Until 1993. 1993, the peace agreement, we accept the peace agreement 100%. We've seen that this agreement should open a new page between us and the Israel state, and we should start a new life, and we support it with all our effort. And we have been waiting for the peace until my brother have been killed in 2000. When my brother killed, we find ourselves in front of a challenge that, can we trust the leader that, does the peace mean a piece of paper that have been signed between two leaders? Is that bring us a peace, or we have a responsibility if we want to live in peace? And this is what we decide, that we should the peace is need a lot of work from us in order to live in peace. If we want this peace to be succeed, we have a big responsibility that we should do in both society. It came as a result of a joint meeting that we had, an Israel group who asked if they can come and join us and bring their solidarity to what's happened to our family when we lost my brother. We refused at the beginning, and then we accept. And when they listened to us, when we told them our story, they start all of them crying. This kind of empathy, we didn't thought that it can happen between us and the Israel side. And then when they tell their stories, we discover that we have half of the fact that the story of this conflict it's not only our story, because with our story we thought that we are 100% right, and our story is the whole story, and this is the fact, and depend on this fact we are looking to the situation, we analyze the situation. But when we hear the story of the other side, we discover that the story of this conflict is the story of both of us. And since that, we start to believe that in order to have peace, we should listen to the story of each other. And part of the story is the Holocaust. The Holocaust, my first experience with the Holocaust, when I arranged a visit of 70 Palestinian bereaved family to visit Yad Vashem Museum. I bring them to the museum, and when we start, I've been watching them one by one, how they will react when they've seen the very difficult pictures there, when they've seen the shoes, when they've seen the things, when they start from a place to another place inside the museum. I've seen Palestinian mothers crying, and I start thinking about this. Out of that, before that, when you mention the Holocaust, the first Palestinian reaction is to deny that this has not happened. And if it's happened, but not as they mentioned. It's not 6 million. It may be 400,000 or something like this. And the Jewish people try to make it big and big in order to get a kind of empathy from the whole world. But when you've seen the picture, when you have been in the museum, when you see by yourself the things that show you, prove to you what's happened, and you start imagine how big it is. Since that, I start to think, where is the Holocaust in our conflict? Why we deny it? Why a lot of Palestinian and Arab and Muslim educate people, when you talk about it, they start to refuse or not to accept it as it is. And in my eyes, I think part of the conflict is the part of the problem, that this conflict produces a kind of competition between the two sides, competition of belong. Like when the Jewish people say or start the story of Judaism since Moshe 3,000 years ago, we in the Palestinian side start to mention that we are the son of the Canaanim, which means 4,000 years ago, which means we have the right more than the Jewish people here, because we are 1,000 years more here. And this is who is suffering more, who is this hummus, you or us, this is our hummus and not your hummus. All these kind of competition is because of the conflict, and this is the wrong way. And part of our work in roots is how to make the people feel that they are more free from inside, and they can accept the story of the other side as it is, without needing to decrease it, or to make it like it's not that big. It's very small, but they make it. This is not the right react that we should give for all the story. And part of it is the Holocaust. Yes, the Holocaust happened, and I know part of our suffering is because of this conflict, Holocaust. But in my eyes, I've seen the things in a different way. I've seen the things that the Jewish people, their homeland is here in Palestine. It's mentioned in my Quran. I'm a Muslim. I believe in my Quran. And it's mentioned the whole story of the Jewish people from Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov and the sons of Yaakov and Youssuf, and the story of Youssuf in Egypt. And when they went to Egypt, Yaakov and his sons, and 400 years in Egypt, and they came and they went out of Egypt with Moses, and 40 years in the desert, and back with Yeshua ben Nun to the Holy Land. This is all mentioned in the Quran. And they have been here, and they have been in Galut for 2,000 years in different places in the world. They suffer everywhere, and ended by the Holocaust. The Holocaust is the most and the biggest tragedy that's happened to those people. And after the Holocaust, they came back home. This is the way that we should look to the Holocaust, that those people belong to this land. They suffered for 2,000 years, and they came back. We should accept them, and we should welcome them here, instead of fighting and start argue who have the right and who's wrong and whose this land is. This land is not for any one of us. We both belong to this land. This is part of the solution. Should be part of the solution. In my eyes, the Holocaust is caused a big trauma for the Jewish people. They don't trust anyone in the world now, because they feel that they trust different nations in their history, and they have and ended by that they have been in danger, they have been attacked, and they have been killed. And now my message to the Palestinian people first, that in order to solve this problem, we should understand that our first enemy is not the people. The fear of the people is the enemy. How we can deal with this fear, how we can cause to those people, for the first time after these 2,000 years, to trust another nation, which is the Palestinian people. This should come from us, from the Palestinian side. First, we should approve to the Jewish people that we are not enemy. We accept them as our cousins. We came from the same father, and we have enough space in this holy land, and they belong to this land, and we belong to this land. Any exclusivity of this land is not accepted. We should change it. We should change our identity, our basic identity. And in our basic identity, we should have that this land, there are two people belong to this land. There are Palestinian people. I am a Palestinian. I represent more than 6 or 7 million people who live here inside the Holy Land. And this is our homeland, and we are not going anywhere. The same moment, the same time that we have another nation very close to us, more close to us than any other nation, who's the Jewish people, the Israeli people. They belong to this land. This is their homeland. They belong to this land. This basic accept should be, we should admit this, first of all, if we want to move ahead and to go and to deal with the conflict.
Let me interrupt you just because we have limited time, and I appreciate your story and sharing, and I have questions for you and Noor. So the first question, going back to the Holocaust, what is Holocaust education like in the Palestinian Authority? Is there anything more detailed these days? Has it changed in the last few years, or is it still something that's not really focused on unless you can bring your students to Yad Vashem or maybe even overseas to Eastern Europe?
I'm following up the educational system in our area, and I know after Oslo, a lot of change happened on the books that we teach our kids. And later, when the peace process stuck, I know that some part of the things of the subject that have been changed is, again, they return back and they change them in a negative way, in my eyes, which is not right.
So a question for Noor: have you brought any other students over to Yad Vashem and watched their reaction? Or you, Khaled, have you brought people from the Palestinian community to Yad Vashem? Is that something you can, is that a rare occurrence, or is that something that you can do on a more regular basis in order to start this part of the education so that Palestinians can learn about the Holocaust and understand the reality of what happened? I think I have to unmute Noor as well.
Noor?
Yeah, I just want to say again, there is no special education about the Holocaust in Palestine, not at all. It's, I think it is still like part of the Second World War history, and you touch it like very briefly, and with making sure, like I think that's how most teachers will handle it, making sure that the Holocaust cannot be any justifier to what Israel did to us, what the Zionist movement did to us, and cannot give any legitimacy to Israel. And Israel have used it this way. So there is no special. I mean, and if like there is like a very famous story of a Palestinian professor from East Jerusalem who brought like a group of Palestinian students to Auschwitz and to Poland to see the concentration camps. And he was boycotted on the academic level for doing that because he was seen as like justifying the Israeli narrative or the Israeli story. So as long as the story of the Holocaust is utilized and used as a propaganda or as a weapon for Israel and to justify the occupation, Palestinians cannot really, I think, deal with it. For going to Yad Vashem, to be honest with you, was a very rough experience to me. And again, I saw both sides. I'm not sure if I can like make any Palestinian go through this experience. It had to be like a very personal decision. I know some Palestinian friends who did it. And yeah, that's what I think about it.
So how big is like the Palestinian nonviolent movement today? I mean, are you both, I mean, do you fear for your lives? Do you have a lot of people who are around you and supporting you in this effort and in getting educated? If you want to talk to people about the Holocaust in your community, is that something you don't feel comfortable doing, or is that something you feel comfortable doing? Can you give us an idea of what you're dealing with in your own communities, what life is like in the Palestinian Authority, I guess?
Oh, I definitely, like, for me, I can talk about this topic whenever to anyone, like to the most, what do you think, the most extremist Palestinian, if I talk about the Holocaust, as long as I'm not, again, putting it in a way to justify the occupation or putting it in a way to justify Israeli actions, then it's fine. And as Khaled said, there is a lot of thoughts about like how Israel and how the Jews over the past decades, they use the issue of the Holocaust, and They basically say that, oh, there are like 6 million Jews who were killed, and there are, you know, millions of Jews who were killed in the Holocaust, in order to gain sympathy from the international community. So as long as I'm not using the topic of the Holocaust in any connection or relation to Israel, then it's fine. I can talk to any Palestinian about the Holocaust. We can talk about it. Again, I think the average Palestinian person is not well educated and is not well informed about the Holocaust. They just know in general that it happened in Europe in the Second World War, that Hitler and the Nazi regime killed the Jews. Again, there are anti-Semitic thoughts, like people think, okay, so the Jews were doing, you know, they were controlling the German economy. They were doing this or that. They were, you know, they were communists. They know some ideas and thoughts, the justifications they heard from other people or from the internet, why the Holocaust happened. Some Palestinians might even think that, okay, so we are fighting the Jews today. The Jews are occupying us. They took our land. And once upon a time, like in history, Hitler killed them, and he was much stronger than them, and he did this to them. And that's why, you know, he's strong. So, but that's if you go to like a Palestinian who never really had an education about the Holocaust, she or he, and they don't really understand how things happened. But I don't feel like danger or threat if I talk about this subject. The work we do at Roots is much more, in a way, putting us in a let's say in a risky situation, which is like coming to talk and have dialogue with Israeli settlers. That's way more like provocative and dangerous in a way than coming to talk about the Holocaust.
Do you? I guess my question maybe for Khaled is, I mean, is your movement growing? Is your program with Roots or within your own community, is that growing? Is it shrinking? Do you feel optimistic right now? You know, how are you able to reach out to the younger Palestinians? Because I think what you basically said, and the same thing from the Jewish Israeli side, is education is what's most important. We have a lot of uneducated people on both sides, not understanding trauma challenges of the other side. We have many uneducated people in America who have no idea about civic society. And I think what studies have shown is the more education you have, the better, the more civic society you have. But I'm just wondering, are you gaining in your battle for education, or are you losing that right now? Khaled, I don't know if you're there.
I think in 2002, I have been part of a group that we met Yasser Arafat, and one of the things that we asked him is to allow us to talk with the student at schools, to open the Palestinian schools in front of a joint initiative, Palestinian-Israel initiative, that they can listen to the story of both together, and that they can know more about what's going on the other side. Because basically, I'm a teacher. I start my life as a teacher of mathematics, and I know how it's work in the schools. You don't need to put anything in the books. The teacher themselves, when they teach, part of the lesson every week is to discuss the conflict and what's going on the ground. And every teacher gave his opinion. And in general, it's negative. It's not positive. And we try to be inside, but Yasser Arafat didn't allow us. Oh, we've seen that kind of challenge, or it's not easy. And I understand him, because during the conflict, it's not easy to accept, especially for the occupied people, to give a kind of empathy to the story of the other side. But don't miss that the reality also, what's going on the ground. Teach the student more than any books. This violence that happened from both sides, from the army against the village and the people and the farmers, from the Palestinian in Tel Aviv and there, the suicide bomber and this violence. It gave a negative picture about the other side. One of the things that I say, our values should be changed. We should not look or give a certificate of hero to those who kill our sons and the people in Israel or in Palestine. We should change this. We should start protect the people by our values, that to kill innocent people is not something that supported by God. And this is part of what we are doing in Roots. The, 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 the religion dialogue, the religion groups who meet and discuss Judaism and Islam and try to understand, do the two religions give us permission to kill each other or not? And this is part of what we are doing. And I'm sure my religion, in the Quran, God mentioned that إن الذين آمنوا والذين هادوا والنصارى والصابئين من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. God says, those, if you ask me about the destiny of the Mu'min or the Jewish or the Christian or any other religion, anyone who believe in one God and believe in the judgment days and do good things with people, like he's not killing people, he is not lying, he is not should not be afraid. I will care about them and they will have good on the next life. Me as a believer person, I believe that this is how God looked to all of us as equal people if we do these three conditions.
Is there, this is a little off topic, but given the most recent flare-up of violence in Israel that we've all been reading about in the news, there were 4 I would say attacks within Israel. Then there's the response on Al-Aqsa Mosque where the Israeli troops went in. So there's a lot of violence right now. Is there a particular reason we're seeing this uptick right now, other than it's Ramadan, Easter, Passover season, or is there something we should know about what's going on in the country?
It's the hope. People lose the hope because the leaders talk. This is when we feel that we are strong, not we as Palestinians here in this region. When the Israel side feel that they are strong and everything is quiet, they continue with one side decisions without caring about the other side. And this is what's happened. This is the normal reaction that the people, when they lose the hope, when they feel that there is no peace in the coming future, and the Palestinian side is suffer from all the economic side, the democratic side, those young people feel that there is no future. There's no future for them. There's no work. There is no hope. They cannot do any of their dreams. And when they face someone with an extreme thinking, and he try to give them that the hope is to do like this and this. One of the religious Islamic leader says, if the way to paradise is so short, just kill a Jewish and you will be in paradise. Then the people want to make it take the short way, like let's do it like this. There's no hope. There's no future. Let's do it like this, because the leader, the religion leaders gave them this option, and which is wrong. We should.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's a reason right now for I mean, is there anything particularly bad, worse happening right now that we don't know about, causing this violence, or if it, and also the violence is coming from different parts from Israel. It's I'll unmute Noor as well. But Noor, I don't know if you have a perspective as to what's happening right now, why this violence from Israeli Arabs, from Palestinians. Is there something we've missed in the news? I think I found an article trying to understand and again, tying it into maybe just because it's Passover, Ramadan. I don't know if that's the connection.
It's not just because of the religious holidays. It's, listen, as long as that Jerusalem, which is like the focus of this conflict, the tension is high in Jerusalem, it affects the rest of the country. And the tension is high in Jerusalem because the Israeli government is trying to take more control over East Jerusalem, over the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. And that means that violence will happen again there. There will be protests. There will be people who are injured or killed, and that will echo everywhere in the Palestinian society. And there are political powers who are interested in flaring up the situation in order to serve political agendas. You have Hamas on the Palestinian side who uses this situation. It's in their favor. It gives them more popularity, more support. You have the Israeli right wing, the settler groups. You have Benjamin Netanyahu who's trying to kind of like break the coalition and go back to power. And the coalition is, you can say, like almost facing a crisis because of what's happening, because of what's happening and other reasons. But in my eyes, as a Palestinian, the reason why things are going bad now, and every year we will witness this other cycle, like in Ramadan, because Israel acts as it's the only legitimate sovereignty over East Jerusalem and in the holy places, meaning in Al-Aqsa, on the Temple Mount, and that again will cause clashes and will cause violence between Palestinians and the Israeli police, the Israeli soldiers, and that will affect us in the rest of the country. As Khaled said, as long as the political leaders are not giving hope by acting this way, they are not giving hope to the people, then there are many people who are trying to live their lives and they don't want to resort to violence on both sides. And there are people who think that violence is the only way. We have to defend ourselves. We have to step up and we have to fight against this occupation. And you have people on the Israeli side who say we have to ensure our security, and it leads to more death and more killing.
In the last few questions, I know we're out of time and we appreciate you staying longer. It's later for you guys. So for Noor, just since you're on, what do you think when you see pictures of like Arab leaders shaking hands with Hitler? And given now your knowledge of the Holocaust, is that, how do you address that image and connection, that Jews see? Like Jews see that picture, and then we read it as the Muslim community in league with Hitler to destroy the Jews of Europe. But when you've been to Yad Vashem, you've had that challenging visit. You are more educated about the Holocaust than most, as you mentioned. How do you deal with that image and that part of history?
Well, for me, I take the history or what happened in its context, meaning that when Hitler was in power in Germany, the Nazi regime was like in power. It was a legitimate power, was a country that many presidents, many leaders dealt with. And when I think of the situation of the Palestinians in the 30s, when we were trying to fight the British and to kick out the British from the land, we were fighting against the British mandate, we needed to make alliances. So I mostly think of it like, for me, I grew up with this perspective that Hitler like represents evilness and like he's an evil, almost like a devil, because of what he did and because of what he's responsible of. But I wasn't, at the same time, when I saw, for example, pictures of him and the Mufti of Jerusalem, the Mufti of Palestine, Hajj bin Husseini, sitting with him, and I understood why, the reason why I understand it. Like as a Palestinian, I understand why we were looking for alliances. We were trying to make alliances against the British. Some might say this was like a wrong strategic mistake, some might say not. But I mostly think of of it in the historical context. That's how I feel about it. I don't feel that any Palestinian is responsible for the Holocaust, including Hajj Amin al-Husseini. I don't think he is responsible for the Holocaust. I think it's the responsibility of Germany. And the way how I feel about it, again, is that we were like in the historical context that we were looking for alliances against the British occupation.
If someone called you, Noor, and said, we'll send you and some students on a trip to Eastern Europe just to learn more about what happened during World War II, is that something you would do? Would you go visit Poland?
Yeah,
Lithuania?
definitely. I thought about that, and I feel to me it would be easier than going to Yad Vashem. Like the statement I'm making in this visit, or maybe the impact I'm making is much easier. Like to go to East Europe and to learn what happened to the Jews and to see and to witness and to see the to learn more about the Holocaust. Yes, I would do that.
Last question for you, and then for Khaled. So, I mean, most people online, I'm going to assume, have never interacted with a Palestinian before. Maybe some of you have. So this is a great opportunity to hear from different perspectives, and that's something that CSP is really focused on. It's called education, and we all need it. But I wanted to find out, like, what it's like for you to sit down with a kippah yarmulke wearing West Bank settler and have a dialogue. You kind of touched on it a bit, but do you have friendships that have kind of developed now because of that, or is it more kind of a respectful dialogue? What's your relationship now with these West Bank settlers that you interact with through Roots and other places? I guess I'm directing it to you, Noor, first, then I'll ask Khaled.
So definitely, like, our work is not necessarily about the human relationships, even though we are talking about like people-to-people work, and we sit together and we not only have dialogue. In those 6 years that I have been at Roots, the Israeli members of Roots became part of my life, a very important part of my life. So even if I tried if I want to avoid it, I couldn't. It's inevitable that we became friends, that we developed this human relationships. Yes, still we are separated because of politics, because of the conflict, because of also because of our identities, and there are kind of like red lines that you can't, and maybe sometimes you shouldn't try to cross. But yeah, the Israeli settlers or the Israeli members of Roots, I would say, are all my friends. I know them. Some of them even came to my house in Bethlehem. I took them to Bethlehem, even though it's illegal under the Israeli law, and they feel dangerous for their lives to come to Area A under Palestinian Authority. But we did that, and yeah, the answer is yes.
I'd like to add there, hopefully when we finally can get our CSP trip going back to Israel, which we have been trying to do. On each of our trips, one of our goals is to spend time. This is not a political trip, but we do like to spend time if we're going to do politics, to learn to kind of approach it from a double perspective. And that's how we met with Roots the first time, Khaled Abu Awwad and Hanan Schlesinger. So I'm hoping we'll meet you in person, Noor, and maybe we were in Beit Lechem and Bethlehem last time. Maybe we'll come back there or go to another place, because it is very important, I think, to be on the ground, to see both sides and understand. We don't have to agree, but to understand a little better. Khaled, I'm going to unmute you for the last word on the same subject as to what has your work for Roots kind of done for you, and what is your hope? I mean, are you feeling optimistic these days or not? Trying to unmute you, Khaled, if you can. If not, then Noor, you're going to get the last word. I'll do it one more time. Okay, Noor, you still there? Am I still here? Yeah, I'm here.
Sorry, it seems like, I guess, his internet dropped off. Khaled, did you want to answer the last question? Or he's back now?
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
You're back.
Okay, I was, yeah, I don't know. I was trying to get Khaled, but Noor, if you want to answer the question, I just want to know, where are you on the optimism button right now for education about the Holocaust, education some kind of, is roots growing? Is there a non-violent, violence in the Palestinian side? Is that shrinking? What's your perspective on this?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, because I barely I can hear you, but I barely see your video. The video wasn't really good. So my answer is, listen, I'm not. There are almost no reason to be optimistic, in my opinion. I'm not very optimistic about the future here. I think the conflict is going from bad to worse. But what I believe in is that I believe again that I have a responsibility. Me, myself, my generation, everyone here have a responsibility, and we have an agency. We have a role to play to change this reality. The work we do at Roots is very important, but it's still very little to change the reality. We're far away from changing the reality yet. I don't rely on the education system. Khaled said something about the experience of people in their daily lives. The actual school is outside in the streets, is what people experience and live and how they are affected. And as long as the occupation is continuing, the occupation is basically creating a curriculum of hate, a curriculum of anger and suffering, and that's our reality. No one can hide it. That's our reality. That's what we are living. So I'm not very optimistic, but I know this is part of my life here, and my job is that I don't really rely on hope. And like many people, I'm frustrated, but I know that I have a responsibility, and I do whatever I can do by increasing the work of Roots, meeting more Israelis, meeting more Palestinians, talk to them, and the activism that we do at Roots, hopefully that it will grow bigger and bigger. I'm hopeful about that. We are recently growing at Roots, despite despite Corona and the pandemic and what happened in the last 2 years, and also the violence. We have now 4 branches in the West Bank. We have in north of the West Bank, the Jordan Valley, our center south of Bethlehem, north of Hebron, in Gush Etzion, and we have now a new branch in the South Hebron Hills. So I hope that more and more Palestinians and more settlers will find their way to Roots, and we will grow more.
Thank you. Khaled, would you like to wrap us up?
That's it. Roots is trying to open the last gate of dialogue between the two sides. And the idea of Roots is not based on two-state solution. This is very important, because we don't think that two-state solution is still an option. You cannot move. We have more than 500,000 settlers or 700,000 settlers in the West Bank. To see the solution is part of the solution is to move them out of the West Bank is not a real real solution. So Roots is talking about that belong to the whole area of the Holy Land for the two people of us, and the Roots see that the dialogue should be open between the not only the left groups, also the right groups. We both are coming from the right side of the political maps in this area, and we try to connect to each other based on respect and accept the belong of both of us. And this is the basic idea of Roots.
Thank you. So I want to thank everybody for participating in today's program. We are getting to Yom HaShoah. We'll be having multiple programs from different perspectives, from an art perspective, from an author's perspective. This was one I wanted to choose today because it's not a topic most of us ever get a chance to hear about from a Palestinian perspective. So I want to thank Noor and Khaled for sharing their perspectives. I want to thank all of you for being in the audience today. Really, again, CSP is about education. And to have really interesting people talk about subjects. It's not my goal or our goal to make you take sides either way. I guess the only thing I would like you to do is take side on education and history and learning. We're in a world where people are turning away from knowledge, turning away from science, turning away from all these things. As you can see the ramifications of that in our society, in Europe. You know, just get educated. And if you're here, that means that's what you're doing. So you are all great people. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you this week. A lot of art and different subjects coming up. I'll share information about Roots if you want to learn more about them, and Khaled and Noor and what they're doing. Noor, you sound like a great tour guide. Your English is better than people who live next in my neighborhood. So hopefully we can bring our group and go on some adventures with you when we come to Israel next. And Rachel Cohen, thank you for organizing today's program. Take care, everybody. Be safe, keep healthy, and have a great rest of your Sunday, depending on how much time you have left of the day. Again, I wanted to wish you a Ramadan Kareem if you are observing Ramadan, and an end of Pesach to the rest of us, okay? Take care, everybody. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you, Khaled. Thank you, Noor. And thank you, Rachel. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody. Bye, Rita. Bye, Batya. Ron Morrison, thank you. Chaim Malks. Thanks, Jonas, Karen. And the Cornells. Faith Hirsch, I see you as well.